Sometimes the turning point in your life doesn't arrive with thunder or flashing lights. It can slip in quietly, disguised as an unanswered call or a careless message. Mine began with a dull ache in my stomach and a text that changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage and myself. What came after wasn't only surgery or recovery. It was awakening, a reckoning, and eventually, a reclamation of the life I almost gave away. I had been rushed to the emergency room that evening, doubled over in pain so sharp it felt like fire tearing through my side. Nurses moved quickly, fastening monitors, sliding 4 lines into my arm, speaking in firm but calm tones. Stay still. Don't move. We're checking everything. Through the haze, I grabbed my phone and typed a message to my husband. Please come to Greenwood Medical now. His reply lit up the screen almost instantly. I'm at the coffee house with Darius. Can't leave right now. I stared at the words, tears blurring my vision. My fingers trembled, but I still typed back, okay. Just 4 letters. Yet they shattered whatever was left of my trust. He didn't know I was lying flat on a gurney, struggling to stay conscious while doctors discussed ruptured organs and immediate surgery. He didn't know they were asking me if I had next of kin to call, while I bit back the truth. The one who should have been there wasn't. That morning, before leaving for work, I had kissed him and told him I wasn't feeling well. He brushed it off, said he had a meeting with Darius, his longtime collaborator on a small publishing project. I'll swing by the center later, he promised. But now he was sipping lattes across town, while I was being prepped for an operating room. The pain had exploded mid-morning, twisting my insides until I collapsed. I tried calling him, no answer. I sent another text, no reply. Finally, I lay in that cold bed, heart racing against the beeping monitors, hearing the surgeon explain that my appendix had ruptured and the infection was spreading fast. They needed to operate right away. As I signed the consent papers with shaky hands, my phone buzzed again. Another message from him. Darius is having a rough day. His editors threatening to cut our project. I can't leave until we sort it. Sorry, love. That tone, casual, detached, hit harder than the pain in my body. I read it over and over, until my vision blurred with both tears and anesthesia. I realized in that moment, I had spent years waiting for him to choose me when it mattered most. And once again, he didn't. The last thing I saw before sleep swallowed me was the harsh glare of the surgical lamp above and those words on my phone, "Can't leave Darius now." And with that, something inside me broke, not just my body, but the illusions I had carried about loyalty, about love, about who he really was. When I opened my eyes again, I was in the ICU, groggy, stitched. My abdomen burned with every shallow breath, the bandages pressing tight against my skin. Machines beeped steadily beside me. A surgeon leaned over, his face tired but kind. "You're stable now," he said gently. "We removed the ruptured appendix and flushed out the infection. You'll need rest, but you're safe." I tried to respond, but my throat was so dry that only a rasp escaped. A nurse slid a straw into a cup and held it to my lips. I sipped slowly, the water cold and grounding. The first thing I asked for was my phone. Someone placed it in my hands, the screen heavy with notifications. Missed calls, unread messages. His name filled them all. Just then, the door opened. My brother, Jamal, stepped in. His shoulders were squared, his face drawn, but his eyes softened when he saw me. "How you holding up?" he asked, pulling a chair closer. I forced a small smile, though my body screamed with pain. The truth was harder. I felt gutted, not just from surgery, but from betrayal. I handed him my phone. He read the messages, his jaw tightening. "Still at the coffee house. Helping Darius. Call me when you're out." The silence in the room thickened. Jamal set the phone down, then looked at me with a fierceness I hadn't seen since we were kids. "You want me to call a lawyer? Freeze the bank accounts? Change the locks?" I shook my head slowly. The wound was still too fresh for decisions. But somewhere deep inside, something shifted. I was done being second place in my own life. Later that day, a man in a gray suit arrived. He introduced himself as Detective Harris. His tone was calm, professional. He explained that when patients came in under delayed or suspicious circumstances, they sometimes logged it for follow-up. He asked if I would allow him to review my messages, the hospital records, and the timeline of events. My chest tightened, but I nodded. Yes. After he left, the quiet in my room felt heavier than before. My mind kept circling back to the same thought. Was I truly a partner in his life, or just an afterthought? Jamal sat by my side, refusing to leave. At one point, he reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone," he whispered. It was the first thing in days that felt like solid ground. Outside the window, rain tapped against the glass, steady and relentless. I lay there, stitched and bruised, wondering who I might become if I finally let go of the man I had begged to show up, but who never did when it mattered most. 2 days later, I was stable enough to be moved out of the ICU. Jamal wheeled me into a private recovery room, but I could already feel the pull of unfinished business pressing against my chest. Detective Harris called ahead that morning. He wanted to arrange a meeting. Not at the hospital, but at the very place my husband had chosen over me, the coffee house. At 3 in the afternoon, Jamal helped me through its doors. I wore a loose wrap over my hospital gown, my steps slow but deliberate. The warm scent of roasted beans and cinnamon filled the air, but it all felt foreign, tainted. Conversations stilled as people noticed me. There they were, my husband and Darius, seated at a corner table, papers spread between them. Darius froze when he saw me. My husband's face shifted from surprise to guilt in a heartbeat. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "We need to talk," I replied, my voice trembling but clear. Before he could answer, Detective Harris stepped from a back aisle, his badge visible, his presence quiet but commanding. "Sir, we'll need to document your account. This is not a performance." The room grew hushed. Patrons glanced at one another, whispering behind coffee cups. I lifted my phone, the messages glowing on the screen. "I texted you that I was being rushed into surgery. And you chose this." I gestured toward the table, over me. He swallowed hard. I didn't think it was that serious. Darius needed me to finish the final draft. We were about to lose everything. I stared at him, heat rising in my chest. "You sacrificed me for a deadline." Darius shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting away from mine. Shame clung to him like a shadow. Detective Harris opened a folder and began reading. Timeline of her admission. Records of your responses. A pattern of repeated absences in times of crisis. Care to explain? My husband's shoulders slumped. I thought she'd be fine. I thought it could wait. The detective cut him off sharply. "You'll put that in your statement." The coffee house, once warm and welcoming, now felt like a stage of judgment. Shells of beans and pastries framed the silence. A clerk gasped softly, covering her mouth. I felt every pair of eyes on us. But inside me, something hardened into clarity. My anger wasn't chaos anymore, it was focus. I turned to the detective. "I want this logged. I want it on record." He nodded, and in that moment I realized, whether or not my husband ever admitted his failure, I no longer needed his recognition. What I needed was accountability. Jamal guided me out of the coffee house. The detective followed with paperwork. My husband didn't chase after us. He just sat there, watching, while something inside me sparked to life. Cold, fierce, unyielding. For the first time in years, I felt a taste of freedom. Back at my apartment, everything felt unfamiliar, like I was stepping into someone else's life. My body moved slowly, each stitch pulling tight, each bruise a reminder of what I had endured. Jamal didn't wait for instructions. He called lawyers, froze joint accounts, changed the locks. He acted as if my silence was enough of an answer. I tried to reclaim rhythm. Some days I could only sit by the window, sketching lines that broke halfway. Other days I forced myself into the small art studio I'd set up in the corner. Paint spilled on canvas, not always beautiful but necessary. I painted bursts of light cutting through shadows, galaxies breaking apart, my therapy in color. I blocked his emails, his calls, his social accounts. Still, messages slipped through. Voicemails filled with excuses I refused to play. Notes slid under my door. "I never meant to hurt you. Let's talk." I folded them unread. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered I'd overreacted. Others said Darius was the real reason behind it all. I ignored them. My lawyer handled the noise, while Detective Harris checked in, methodical, steady. Every conversation peeled back another illusion I'd clung to for years. One morning, my landlord handed me a letter. Your husband is requesting access to collect his belongings. I didn't even read the rest. I slid it into an envelope for my attorney. I learned to cook simple meals again. I read novels into the night. I slept without listening for a door opening in the dark. At dusk, I'd step onto the balcony and watch the sky bleed orange into purple. That silence, once unbearable, slowly became mine. Weeks passed. My steps grew steadier, my voice firmer. I walked past the coffee house one afternoon, its windows glowing with soft light, customers bent over books and mugs. For a moment, memory tugged at me, but I kept walking. That place was his refuge, not mine. I would build my own elsewhere. Then came the headline. A local paper picked up my story. Community artist hospitalized. Husband's absence raises questions. I stared at the article online, wincing at how my private wound had become public. The piece quoted Detective Harris, mentioned, ignored messages and critical delays. Social media erupted. Some called me brave. Others called him a coward. My brother handled the noise while I stayed quiet. Instead, I let my art speak. An op-ed I had written weeks earlier on emotional labor and self-worth was published in that same paper. To my surprise, it spread quickly, shared in groups and circles I didn't even know. For once, my voice wasn't just survival, it was resonance. Then came his retaliation. A legal notice arrived, defamation. He claimed I had exaggerated, misrepresented him, painted him unfairly. But when I held the papers in my hands, I felt no tremor, no fear, just a strange calm. I went back to my studio, paintbrush in hand, and poured my defiance onto canvas. I began a series called Thresholds, doorways fractured, walls split open, light breaking through. Visitors came to see it, and many whispered, I see myself in this. For the first time, I realized my healing wasn't only mine. My story had become part of others, finding their way out of silence too. Opening night of Thresholds arrived on a cool spring evening. The community center's gallery buzzed with voices, the walls lined with my canvases, ruptured doors, fractured light, shadows giving way to brightness. I stood among strangers and friends, my body steady, my spirit rooted. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing in someone else's shadow. People stopped before the paintings, whispering words I never expected to hear. She's strong. I see myself in this. My story was no longer just mine, it was stitched into the healing of others. Days later, a small unmarked package slid through my mail slot. Inside was a single page, a manuscript draft with a handwritten dedication. To Maya, who showed me what I lost. His name followed at the bottom. I stared at it, my chest heavy but calm. Then I slipped it back into an envelope and sent it away unopened. No note, no explanation. That belonged to another life, one I had already buried. I purged the remnants he had left behind. Clothes, letters, trinkets tied to memories I no longer wished to carry. I kept only what felt like mine. My canvases, my sketchbooks, the small potted herbs that leaned toward the sun on my windowsill. Each choice was a declaration. This space, this life, this story mine. 6 months later, I returned to the street where the ambulance had picked me up that night. Cars passed casually now, pedestrians laughing, no trace of urgency. I stood at the curb, breathing deeply. A reporter who'd once interviewed me approached and asked softly, "Do you regret pushing him away?" I shook my head. I regret waiting so long to speak. But not this. Back in the gallery, one canvas in the Threshold series drew the most attention. A doorway half open, spilling light into darkness. Visitors lingered there in silence, some with tears in their eyes. I listened quietly, grateful that my pain had transformed into something others could carry forward. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the walls alive with my own work. The scars on my body had faded to faint reminders, but my spirit felt expansive, uncontained. I realized survival wasn't the endgame. Becoming, that was the real work. I no longer thought of him as someone who held a piece of me. He was just a chapter, a lesson, a ghost that no longer had keys to my heart. Now, I mentor young artists at the community center, teaching them not only brushstrokes, but also the courage to claim their own stories. When someone asked me how I found confidence again, I told them, by refusing to shrink, by naming the wounds, by living my truth instead of waiting for someone else's approval. That night, I sat by my window with a blank canvas before me. The city outside hummed with laughter and footsteps, the soft thrum of life moving on. I dipped my brush into fresh paint and began to draw the first lines. The strokes flowed, the colors bloomed. And with each one, I understood, this was not an ending. It was the beginning of the life I had chosen. Finally, fully and fearlessly mine.